Hi, today we're going to talk about 4 herb formulas in the use of Chinese medicine. This is a skill which we can develop using 4 herbs only in writing a formula for any syndrome or mixture of syndromes, patient symptoms that we need to treat. Of course, there are many 4 herb formulas traditionally existing already. I'm sure you know them all. Sejunza Tang, Sulbu Tang, Chen Tang, etc., which exist. The formulas that we are writing are denoted via the chief, its deputy, its assistant, and the Envoy herb, which again, traditional categories where herbs have specific actions and assist each other to work for a balanced formula. First of all, you're thinking, why limit to 4 herbs? Well, it's not. It's actually a discipline, and we're teaching this. We're teaching the second part in February. We did the first part in the autumn of 2012. And the second part is actually now going into specific syndromes and symptoms. For instance, things like 22 syndromes that cover rhinitis and 20 syndromes that cover amenorrhea and dysmenorrhea, for instance. All using formulas that only contain 4 herbs. Now, the 4 herb formulas can be used in themselves, or they can be used as a base where another couple of herbs are added. But the emphasis really is keeping the formulas at a very low number of herbs, because when writing formulas, alright, if you're going to just repeat and copy and use traditional formulas like Xiao Yao San, which I'm sure everybody likes to use, Lu Wei Di Hong Wan, etc., well, that's easy enough. But actually, if you're writing herbs specifically for patients with specific symptoms and syndromes and conditions that require the balance of traditional functions and energetics harmonized with the modern pharmacological uses of the herbs, which is a discipline that I personally learned over the decades working in Chinese hospitals, university teaching hospitals, working with professors of different disciplines. For instance, they would not produce traditional formulas as we know them, but within a formula that they had written for a particular condition, you may see elements of Xiao Yao San, elements of Gui Pi Tang, elements of Lu Wei Di Hong Wan. And you could say to them, well, I don't recognize this formula, but I recognize at least 4 formulas within this formula, plus a few additions. Correct, that's how they write formulas. So the discipline of writing completely unique formulas for each patient that you see is a discipline that's been practiced for centuries, right up until working in university teaching hospitals, TCM in China today, which you probably all know anyway. And the discipline of using as few herbs as possible, it really is aligned to the axiom that it is easy when writing a formula to choose herbs. What is difficult is to leave herbs out. For instance, it's very easy to write a 30 herb formula for your patient who has knotty disease, for instance. That means a complex series of syndromes that are knotted like a big ball of wool, and you have to untie each knot carefully. If you get the wrong knot at the wrong time, the ball becomes tighter and harder to treat. This does require quite a complex formula, but it's very easy to write. When I say easy, it's easier to write a formula that contains 30 herbs, because then you're covering all bases. But to only write a formula that, say, covers 4 herbs or 6 herbs, that requires a lot of thinking, because you may start with 30 herbs that cover all bases, but you have to then scrutinize the formula and then eliminate all the herbs that are really not so necessary. And that's where the real discipline comes. And that's where the inspiration, the thinking, the stimulation of being a herbalist prescribing a unique formula comes in too. So actually learning this subject is a lot of fun, a lot of game playing, a lot of puzzles to solve, but at the end of it, real patience to help. So it has a very serious element at the same time. So why 4 herbs? Well, for instance, we know in the West with patients' tolerance and the price of herbs too, which you know, with China's rising economy, the price of herbs are going up and up and up. And of course the demand for traditional Chinese medicine is increasing so much because we're effective. And we know that. But so it's going to increase demand, which will increase costs. So we have to keep the formulas low anyway. Now, if you've got a 20 herb formula and the patient is taking, say, 60 grams a day, which is standard, they're not going to get very many grams for each herb in that formula. So the actual effect of those herbs in that formula is going to be less significant. Conversely, if your formula only has 4 herbs, well, of course, the significance then are the herbs in the formula will be greatly raised. Of course, sticking to the materia medica requirements, where a herb, if it's 9 to 15 grams, you stay within that limit, obviously. So that's another law that has to be introduced. But as I said before, to actually produce a 4-herb formula usually is where we start, but another 1 or 2 additions at most usually ensues with the person's particular symptoms to be addressed. And of course, with fewer herbs in your formula will be much more exact in terms of the grams for each particular herb will be at a higher level, all within the materia medica laws, of course. And in that way, you can have a much more precise, dramatic, and potentially stronger effect than you would in a formula that had many, many different herbs, where the formula would be very diluted. So that's actually the most important part. It's about focus. And the 4-herb formula was inspired by Mayway, Dr. Mayway, a Shanghai doctor last century, and his primary student, Professor Wu Bo-ping, who I studied with in beginning of the 90s and the mid-90s. And they were expounding the efficacy of using 7-herb formula, where each formula would literally have 7 herbs, where they covered 56 methods of treatment, which is 56 syndromes. In fact, there's a wonderful book here produced by Jason Black, who's a student of Professor Wu Bo-ping, which has come out recently. Everyone should get it, really. It's a beautiful book that actually goes into detail on the use of the 7-herb formula method. So we're not trying to get better than that. We're just using 4 herbs based, as I said before, on the chief, the deputy, the assistant, and the envoy, with the idea that one may add another 2 herbs if necessary, and often it is, to complete the formula. On a practical level, most of you now are having to run your pharmacies, which is a great way to get to know and love the herbs, but of course it's very time consuming. If you're paying somebody expensive, if you do it yourself, then you know, as I did to my cost when I ran my pharmacy, you only get 4 hours sleep a night, because when you're in the pharmacy you're weighing up herbs. But using 4 herbs, of course, making a prescription is so much quicker. By the way, if you use raw herb powders, excuse me for turning, but I just wanted to show you raw herb powders. These are actually the pure herbs that we have in whole form that are ground to a very fine powder, and is a much quicker way to weigh herbs up in the pharmacy. Imagine if you're only doing 4 herbs, it's going to take you 5 minutes using your scales. And for the patients, it's cheaper. You only need to use a 1/3 amount. And they prepare it in a thermos flask, so they don't lose the essential oils, which is a big problem, boiling herbs. And it's so convenient for them to travel, to make. No boiling, no sieves, no mess. That's another subject which we will cover later on. But so there's the practical consideration for you as practitioners. Making 4-herb formulas is so much easier, so much quicker. So, if you want to know more, why don't you come along mid-February? I think there's 1 or 2 places left. If not, I'm sure you'll do this course again some later date, and we'll let you know. Thank you for listening.